On the fateful day of June 6, 1944, a Sherman tank named Fury found itself on the shores of Normandy, facing a devastating blow. As the crew hastily abandoned the crippled vehicle, it seemed that the mission had reached its end. However, one man refused to give up: Sergeant Curtis Culin. Lacking any formal engineering training or specialized expertise, Culin possessed a remarkable ingenuity and a determination to overcome the obstacle. His commanding officer initially dismissed his idea as sheer madness, but in a remarkable feat of improvisation, Culin managed to construct a remarkable invention in just 48 hours, using nothing more than scrap metal and a welding torch. This simple yet brilliant creation would go on to have a profound impact on the entire invasion, earning the personal attention and order of 5,000 units from General Eisenhower himself. This remarkable story, often overlooked in the annals of history, stands as a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the ability of a single individual to make a significant difference, even in the midst of the most daunting challenges. It is a tale that deserves to be told, a testament to the unsung heroes who played a crucial role in the success of D-Day. Normandy, France, June 1944, 6 days after the D-Day landings, and the Allied advance had ground to a complete standstill. This was not due to German tanks or artillery, but rather the formidable Norman hedgerows. These were not your typical decorative backyard hedges, but ancient barriers, thick walls of earth, stone, and tangled roots, built by farmers over centuries to mark property boundaries. Some stood 15 feet tall and just as thick, with roots extending 10 feet or more. These natural fortresses blanketed Normandy like a labyrinth, and for American tank crews, they became deadly traps. Whenever a Sherman tank attempted to breach these obstacles, the results were catastrophic. The Allied forces faced a daunting challenge as they confronted the German defenses. Sergeant Curtis Culin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron witnessed the grim reality unfold daily. As the Sherman tanks approached the hedgerows, they would tilt upwards in a desperate attempt to climb over, exposing their vulnerable underbellies. The German soldiers, armed with anti-tank weapons, would seize the opportunity and unleash a deadly barrage. One shot, one kill, a devastating tactic that claimed countless lives. The crews who managed to survive were often left traumatized, burned, or both, overwhelming the medics and the morgue details. The tactical situation had become increasingly desperate, and Allied planners were forced to confront this formidable challenge. The Allied forces had anticipated being well within French territory by this point, steadily advancing towards the capital. Yet, they found themselves mired in a dense labyrinth of hedgerows, making painfully slow progress of mere hundreds of yards per day. Each field proved a separate battleground, with every hedgerow presenting a new challenge. The Germans needed not pour in massive reinforcements, but merely wait patiently behind these natural obstacles, picking off American armor as it exposed itself. Culin was no engineer, lacking formal higher education. Prior to the war, he had been a humble mechanic in New Jersey, repairing cars and trucks. However, he possessed a keen understanding of machinery, leverage, and the application of force. As he watched yet another Sherman tank burn after attempting to surmount a hedgerow, a realization began to dawn. The hedgerows posed a formidable challenge, but Culin recognized that the key was not to surmount them, but to penetrate them. The tank's attempts to traverse the dense, entrenched barriers were proving futile, exposing their vulnerable underbellies to the enemy's fire. Culin realized that if they could somehow cut through the compacted earth, stone, and roots at ground level, the tanks could plow through the hedgerows without exposing their weaknesses. However, these ancient natural fortifications had withstood the elements for centuries and would not yield to anything less than a precisely applied, massive force. Undeterred, Culin began sketching ideas in his ever-present notebook, much to the bemusement of his crewmates. He understood that the solution lay in devising a method to efficiently breach the formidable hedgerows, allowing the tanks to advance without risking their vulnerable components. Sergeant Cullin's colleagues often chuckled at his unconventional approach, jokingly suggesting he could resolve the entire conflict with his hastily sketched designs. While the tone was light-hearted, there was an underlying skepticism. Many brilliant minds had grappled with the hedgerow dilemma, yet none had found a solution. What made this particular sergeant believe he could succeed where others had failed? Undeterred by the doubts, Culin recognized that mechanics were often underestimated. The assumption that manual labor equated to a lack of intellect was misguided. In reality, every skilled mechanic was a problem solver, adept at deciphering the intricate workings and interactions of recalcitrant machinery, determined to make it function as intended. The hedgerows were a formidable obstacle, but Kin believed he had a solution. He sought a damaged tank, some scrap metal, and the approval of a daring officer. Sergeant Culin approached Captain Samuel Morrison with an audacious proposal: to weld steel prongs, fashioned from the ubiquitous German anti-tank obstacles known as Czech hedgehogs, onto the front of a disabled Sherman tank. This modified vehicle would then charge into the hedgerows at full speed, using the prongs like giant blades to cut through the stubborn vegetation. The armored behemoths would carve through the soil and vegetation, forging a passage. Captain Morrison regarded Culin with bewilderment, questioning the sergeant's proposal. "Let me get this straight, Sergeant. You want to take a tank that's already been fired upon, weld scrap metal to it, and then deliberately ram it at full speed into a solid earthen barrier. Is that your plan?" Culin responded evenly, "Yes, sir. The current strategy involves driving tanks over hedgerows where they get hit in the underbelly. My plan keeps the armor facing the enemy at all times. The Germans can't penetrate the frontal armor. They need that vulnerable belly shot. If we never expose that weak point, they can't." The commander contemplated the proposal in silence, acknowledging the strategic merit while recognizing the inherent risks. Modifying the 609 tanks on the battlefield, utilizing untested gear in combat, posed grave consequences should the endeavor fail. The potential loss of valuable 615 tanks and crews. Yet, if successful, it might just turn the tide. "How long would it take to construct this contraption?" the commander inquired. The engineer requested 2 days, welding tools, and permission to scavenge materials from the beach obstacles, promising a prototype within the allotted time. It was a gamble that could reshape the course of the Normandy campaign. "You have 48 hours, the commander declared. "If this doesn't work, we're both finished." Culin promptly saluted and set to work at 6:48. He requisitioned an acetylene torch, welding gear, and a work crew. He then made his way to the beaches where the initial D-Day landings had occurred. These shores were now littered with German defensive obstructions, the very ones intended to impede Allied landing craft, but largely bypassed during the initial assault. Culin found the Jack hedgehogs well suited for his purpose. These were steel anti-tank obstacles composed of 3 heavy iron beams welded together in the shape of a giant jack, a massive children's toy, but forged from hardened steel and weighing hundreds of pounds. The German forces had strategically positioned thousands of steel obstacles, known as hedgehogs, along the coastlines, anticipating their effectiveness in deterring tanks and landing craft. However, these formidable structures had become mere scrap metal, awaiting repurposing. Culin and his crew set to work, cutting the hedgehogs apart with torches. Through the night, they meticulously trimmed the steel beams to a length of approximately 4 feet and sharpened the tips, reinforcing the welds. By the end of the first day, they had 4 prongs ready, each one as thick as a man's leg and as hard as railroad track. The next phase required a delicate touch, as they had to weld these prongs to the front of a Sherman tank without compromising the tank's structural integrity or interfering with its mobility. The tank's crew meticulously calculated the angles and positioning of the prongs. They had to be low enough to dig into the hedge's base, spaced widely enough to tear through a broad section, and sturdy enough to withstand the impact without breaking. "Do you really think this will work?" queried Private Eddie Kowalski, one of the welders assisting with the project. "I know it will," Culin replied, adjusting his welding mask. "The physics are sound. Steel teeth driven by a 30-ton tank hitting earth and roots. Something's bound to give, and it won't be the steel." By the following morning, the modification was finished. The Sherman tank now sported 4 steel prongs extending from its front. The soldiers gathered around the peculiar creation, Their curiosity piqued. Some marveled at the sight, while others expressed doubt. Bets were placed, wondering whether the engineer would be praised or reprimanded. "Looks like a porcupine trying to mate with a pig," one soldier quipped. CQ affectionately patted the steel prongs, undeterred. "Perhaps so," he replied, "but this pig is about to burrow through every obstacle between here and Berlin." Captain Morrison inspected the modified tank, scrutinizing the welds and testing the strength of the prongs. After a moment, he nodded. "Very well, Sergeant. You've built your unconventional contraption. Now it's time to prove it works," he announced. "Tomorrow morning, we'll find a suitable target." That fateful evening, Culin found himself tossing and turning, his mind consumed by the intricate calculations he had meticulously reviewed. The math was sound, the engineering principles impeccable, yet the distinction between theory and reality weighed heavily on his conscience. What if the prongs were to snap upon impact? What if they dug in too deep, causing the tank to become hopelessly stuck? Or, worse yet, what if the entire audacious contraption only served to exacerbate the situation? But Cullen's thoughts kept returning to the burning Shermans, the crews trapped within, never to emerge. He contemplated the hedgerows that had transformed Normandy into a graveyard for American armor. Something had to be done, and if his idea proved successful, it could potentially save hundreds of lives. The dawn's first rays had barely breached the skyline when Cullen's refurbished Sherman tank rumbled towards a formidable hedgerow, its towering 12-foot height presenting an imposing obstacle. Several officers, including Captain Morrison and Major Jack Williams from Divisional Command, had assembled to witness the trial. The Sherman's volunteer crew, Driver Corporal Jake Mitchell, Gunner Sergeant Tom Harrison, and Loader Private First Class Danny Chen, were either courageous or reckless, perhaps a blend of both. As the engine roared to life and the hatches were sealed, the gathered soldiers fell silent, their eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Cullen stood alongside the observers, his heart pounding with anticipation. Adrenaline surged through his veins as the critical moment approached. All his meticulous planning and construction had led to this pivotal juncture. Success would revolutionize the Normandy campaign, but failure could prove catastrophic, with good men's lives at stake. Morrison's gaze locked with Culin's, who affirmed his readiness. With a decisive motion, the signal was given, and the Sherman tank's engine roared to life, belching black smoke as it gathered momentum. Hurtling towards the unyielding hedge at tremendous speed, the 30-ton behemoth collided with a thunderous impact. The earth erupted, roots snapping like gunfire, as the entire vehicle shuddered from the force of the collision. The armored vehicle initially appeared to be stuck, entangled within the dense hedge. Anxious soldiers held their breath, watching intently. Gradually, the Sherman tank began to inch forward. The steel prongs were working, digging deep into the ancient earthwork, generating leverage and tearing through roots and stones. The tank tilted slightly forward, maintaining a nose-down position to keep the frontal armor facing any potential danger. More roots snapped, and dirt cascaded off the hull as the engine strained with effort. Suddenly, the Sherman burst through the other side of the hedgerow, emerging into the open field beyond. The tank had created a flawless breach, wide enough for other vehicles to follow. The armored behemoth rumbled forward, its undercarriage safely concealed from harm's reach. At 12:36, the soldiers erupted in jubilant cheers. Cullen felt a wave of relief wash over him. His unconventional strategy had paid off. The Sherman's crew emerged from their hatches, grinning with satisfaction. "That was the smoothest hedgerow crossing I've ever experienced," Corporal Mitchell exclaimed. "We barely felt the impact inside, and our vulnerable underbelly never once faced enemy fire." Major Williams approached Cullen, his expression grave. "Sergeant, how many of these modifications can you produce, and how quickly?" Cullen responded, "Sir, if I have enough welders and access to more hedgehog obstacles, my crew could modify 10 tanks a day. Possibly even more, if we work around the clock." Major Simmons beamed with pride as he surveyed the impressive display before him. "Remarkable work, Sergeant Cullen," he commended, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "This invention of yours has the potential to be a game-changer." Cullen's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Sir, I appreciate your confidence, but a single successful trial is not enough," he cautioned, his brow furrowing with concern. "We must put this to the test against a real German position, under live enemy fire." Nodding thoughtfully, the major replied, "Absolutely, Sergeant. I'm going to make sure you have all the resources you need, 50 welders and all the steel you require. I want 100 of these modified tanks ready by the end of the week." He paused, a gleam in his eye. "And I'll be sending a report to General Bradley himself. This is going to revolutionize the Normandy campaign." Cullen felt a surge of pride, but remained cautious. "Sir, with respect, we can't celebrate just yet. We need to see how this performs in actual combat before we can claim victory. That's the only way to truly gauge its effectiveness," Morrison grimly acknowledged. "I anticipated you'd say that," he replied. "There's a fortified German position roughly 2 miles from here that's been stalling our advance for 3 days, the officer continued. "Battalion wants it captured, but every approach is obstructed by dense hedgerows. And every attempt to cross those barriers has been disastrous. If your modification functions under fire in that scenario, it'll conclusively validate your concept." "When do we depart, sir?" "At first light tomorrow," the commander decided. "I'm attaching you to the tank as a technical advisor. You'll ride with Mitchell's crew. If any issues arise, you need to be present to observe and comprehend the reasons." Cullen swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of his assignment. Sergeant Culin meticulously inspected the reinforced Sherman tank, tightening bolts and scrutinizing the prongs for any structural weaknesses. He understood that the controlled test was no match for the chaos of real combat, where nothing ever went as planned. As Private Chen approached him working late into the night by lantern light, he urged the sergeant to rest up for the momentous day ahead. Cullen had initially hoped to remain behind and continue modifying the vehicle, but Morrison's directive was clear. He needed to witness his invention in actual battle to determine if further improvements were necessary before mass production. Only then could Cullen confidently declare the design ready. The upcoming engagement would put the tank's capabilities to the ultimate test, far beyond the confines of a controlled environment. Cullen knew that the true measure of his work would be revealed on the battlefield, where the unpredictable nature of combat would challenge the vehicle's resilience and performance. Restful slumber evades you, Chen. Excessive contemplation has unsettled your mind. Culin contemplated deception, then resolved that candor would serve better. Overwhelming trepidation consumes him. This ingenious device holds promise in theory. 1532 Its solitary trial run proved successful. Yet the lives of many hinge upon the precision of his calculations tomorrow. 1538 Should he have overlooked a critical flaw in the design, then we must trust in your intimate familiarity with this creation. 1546 You constructed this marvel, and comprehend its intricacies better than any other. Tomorrow, we shall charge through those obstructions and demonstrate to the Germans the futility of their concealment. 1552 Cullen yearned for Chen's unwavering confidence, but could only prepare diligently and pray that his audacious plan would indeed succeed. 1558–1603 The sun's first rays peeked over the Normandy horizon, casting a dreary, chilly drizzle that blanketed the landscape in a somber, monochromatic hue. Culin, his nerves alight with anticipation, climbed into the Sherman tank, assuming his position in the commander's cupola to observe and provide technical guidance to the crew. Their armored vehicle, now affectionately dubbed Rhinoceros by the men, would spearhead a small column's advance toward the German stronghold. The plan was straightforward. Utilize the hedgerow cutter to breach the formidable barriers that had thwarted previous attempts, allowing the accompanying infantry to push forward without being caught in the Germans' deadly killing zones. With a rumble, the engines roared to life, and the order to move out was given. The massive rhinoceros-like armored vehicle rumbled forward, its sharp steel prongs glistening in the early morning light. They were approaching the first hedgerow, beyond which, according to intelligence reports, a deadly German machine gun nest had been decimating American infantry for days. The usual tactic would be to attempt scaling the hedgerow, exposing the tank's vulnerable underbelly to a potentially devastating German anti-tank weapon. "Steady, Culin," the commander said over the intercom. Hit it at a slight angle, about 20 degrees. That'll help the prongs bite in. Roger that, Corporal Mitchell, the driver replied, adjusting their approach. The impact came with a resounding. The tank lurched forward with a bone-rattling impact. Earth and debris erupted around them. Within the armored vehicle, the crew was jolted against their harnesses, but emerged unscathed. The sturdy prongs held firm. The engine roared as the tank plowed through ancient vegetation, its treads tearing through centuries-old growth. Emerging on the other side, they encountered a startled German machine gun crew scrambling to ready their weapon. The Sherman's main gun fired first, a single high-explosive round that swiftly neutralized the threat before the Germans could respond. "It works," Chen exclaimed over the intercom. "It actually works in combat." But there was no time for celebration, as more hedgerows lay ahead, each potentially concealing enemy forces. The armored behemoth pressed onward. The armored behemoth relentlessly forged ahead, effortlessly breaching one hedgerow after another. Its prongs functioned flawlessly with each advance, allowing the infantry following closely behind to surge forward without being pinned down by the formidable hedgerow defenses that had previously impeded their progress. For the first time since the Normandy landings, they could now push on unhindered, clearing German positions that had seemed impregnable just hours earlier. However, a more daunting challenge lay ahead. Intelligence reports had warned of a fearsome German Panther tank, a far more formidable adversary than the infantry entrenched behind the particularly imposing hedgerow. The Panther's powerful 75 mm gun posed a grave threat, capable of destroying a Sherman tank from long range. If the armored spearhead were to become bogged down while breaching the obstacle, the consequences could be dire. The armored vehicle's crew knew they'd be vulnerable in the open. At 1913, Harrison reported the enemy's position behind partial cover. Cullen's mind raced at 1918. They could retreat, call for artillery support, or play it safe. But that went against the purpose of his invention, to change the rules of engagement. "Breach the hedge at 1930, Culin ordered. "Don't stop for anything. We'll surge through and emerge with our gun already aimed." Mitchell didn't hesitate, and the Sherman surged forward at 1937. The impact was tremendous, as this hedge proved thicker than any they had encountered. For a harrowing moment at 1942, the tank seemed to slow, the prongs struggling against the dense foliage. The massive engine roared to life, belching thick clouds of smoke as the tracked behemoth strained against the earth. Inch by inch, the armored juggernaut forced its way through the undergrowth, bursting through the hedgerow at an angle. Though not perfect, the maneuver was sufficient. Harrison kept his weapon trained, ready to engage the enemy. As the vehicle emerged, there it was, the Panther tank, its turret still rotating to acquire the unexpected target. Harrison acted first, his armor-piercing round striking the thinner side armor and penetrating the German war machine. The Panther shuddered, smoke billowing from its hatches as the crew hastily abandoned the stricken vehicle. The Rhinoceros's machine guns then persuaded any remaining resistance to surrender. The infantry swiftly apprehended the German captives, having caught up to the scene. An officer, beaming with delight, approached Sergeant Culin, exclaiming, "I don't know what kind of sorcery you worked on this tank, but you've accomplished in 2 hours what we've been striving to do for 3 days. That German stronghold is now neutralized." Culin emerged from the tank, his legs trembling with exhaustion. His unconventional design had not only succeeded in controlled trials but had also proven its worth in actual combat against real enemy fortifications under fire. Shortly after, Captain Morrison arrived, his radio relaying reports from other units. "General Bradley himself has requested your presence. It seems Major Williams's report has made quite an impact. They're referring to your invention as the CQIN hedgerow cutter and have ordered 5,000 units to be manufactured immediately." Cullen struggled to comprehend the sheer scale of the request. His modest modification, hastily constructed from scrap in just 48 hours, was now slated for mass production and deployment across the entire Allied armored force. "Sir, I'm merely a mechanic. I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," Cullen protested. "Nonsense, Sergeant. You're the one who solved the hedge problem," Morrison interjected. Take ownership of your achievement. You've just changed the course of the war. The Sherman's engine roared louder, belching black smoke in the wake of the rhinoceros's combat success. Within days, every tank depot in Normandy received orders for the CQIN hedgerow cutter. The military promptly dispatched welding teams from engineering units to commence the installation of Culin hedgerow cutters. Scouring the beaches, they amassed additional Czech hedgehogs to establish assembly lines in nearby fields, operating around the clock. Culin, extracted from his regular duties, found himself tasked with training the welding crews, traveling from one depot to another. He meticulously demonstrated the precise prong angles, optimal welding procedures, and reinforcement methods to prevent the cutters from fracturing under pressure. Emphasizing the critical importance of proper prong depth, Culin cautioned that if positioned too high, the tank would tilt upwards, exposing its underbelly, while too low a placement would prove equally problematic. The tank engineers meticulously positioned the steel prongs at a precise 15-degree downward angle, ensuring optimal cutting action when plowing through dense foliage. Initially, some welders expressed skepticism about the crude design, but their doubts quickly evaporated after witnessing the remarkable performance of the rhinoceros tanks, effortlessly breaching hedgerows that had halted all other vehicles. Inspired by this combat footage, the welders worked with renewed vigor, taking great pride in the modifications they were installing. General Omar Bradley himself visited one of the tank modification sites, where he found Sergeant Culin immersed in a welding project, training a new crew. Hudland, recognizing the general's rank, immediately snapped to attention. On the evening of the 23rd, Bradley approached the sergeant, greeting him with a nod. "At ease, Sergeant. I've come to see the man who unstuck my army." Bradley's expression conveyed a hint of amusement as he continued, "Your invention, implemented just yesterday, is brilliant in its simplicity. We've been throwing sophisticated engineering solutions at the hedgerow problem for weeks: artillery barges, explosive charges, modified dozers. Nothing worked consistently. And then you come along with scrap metal and a welding torch and solve it in 2 days." The sergeant responded humbly, "Sir, I simply did what needed to be done. That's what good soldiers do." Impressed, Bradley declared, "I'm recommending you for the Legion of Merit, and I'm also authorizing a field promotion to technical sergeant. This army needs more men who can think outside the box." With that, Bradley turned and departed, leaving the newly promoted sergeant to reflect on the events that had unfolded. Cullin's fellow crewmates swarmed him with accolades and praise. Yet, he felt ambivalent. Hailed as a prodigy, he had received medals and promotions. But the war in Normandy still claimed lives. His invention helped, yet it was no panacea. The conflict remained far from resolution. Private Kowalski, who had assisted with the original prototype, approached Culin. "Sarge, you don't seem too thrilled about all this." Culin replied, "I am, Eddie. I can't stop thinking about the crews we lost before this came about. What if I'd conceived it sooner? Pushed harder for testing?" Kowalski responded firmly, "You can't dwell on that. You can't save the men who've fallen." The relentless advance of the Culin hedgerow cutters brought relief to the beleaguered tank crews, even as the guilt of past losses lingered. Culin recognized the pragmatic wisdom in Kowalski's words. Every day, more tanks rolled through the hedgerows, and fewer crews met fiery fates. The past could not be undone, but the present demanded focus on the living. War allowed no time for, if only, lamentations. It required steady progress, problem-solving, and the ceaseless effort to rescue those still in peril. As the Culin hedgerow cutters saw widespread deployment, their impact became undeniable. Frontline troops soon relayed their insights and refinements. The cutter's 25-52 original design was highly effective, yet there was always scope for enhancement. Certain crews discovered that incorporating a fifth central 25-59 prong bolstered cutting efficiency on exceptionally dense hedgerows. Others trialed serrated edges on the 26.06 prongs, enabling them to grip and tear through stubborn root masses. A few 26-11 innovative tank commanders even added reinforcement plates to safeguard the welds from small arms fire. Culin 26-18 welcomed all these adaptations. He had never claimed his design was flawless, merely that it functioned. If the 26 to 26 soldiers in the field could optimize its performance, he was eager to incorporate their lessons. The most impactful innovations often arise from those on the ground. The seasoned tank commander proudly showcased the innovative device to a visiting war journalist. While he had conceived the initial design, the contributions of countless 26 to 39 tank crews had refined and enhanced it over time. This was no longer solely his invention, but rather a collaborative effort belonging to every 26 to 45 soldier who had improved upon it. One particularly ingenious modification emerged from a tank unit in the 3rd Armored 26 to 52 Division. They had observed that the cutters would occasionally become clogged with compacted soil and roots, diminishing their 26 to 58 effectiveness when tackling successive hedgerows. Inspired by agricultural harrow equipment, they devised a simple mechanism that automatically cleared debris from the prongs as the tank advanced. Though a minor 27 to 11 alteration, it enabled the tanks to breach multiple hedgerows in quick succession without. The German forces were initially perplexed by the Allies' newfound capability to breach hedgerows with ease. Post-war enemy reports revealed their bewilderment, as armored vehicles were now able to traverse the hedgerows without exposing their vulnerable aspects. The source of this development remained a mystery for some time. However, CQN, a key figure, had swiftly incorporated a crucial improvement into the training for the 27 to 25 installations. He would proudly share this insight with welding crews, emphasizing the value of iterative engineering that incorporates feedback from the end users. This adaptive approach, where a solution emerged from the field, exemplified the dynamic nature of good engineering. The 27 to 19 cutters, once a point of manual labor, had been optimized, streamlining the process and enhancing the Allies' tactical capabilities against the German defenses. As the Normandy campaign unfolded, the Germans sought to devise countermeasures against the Allies' newfound ability to swiftly navigate the treacherous hedgerows. They endeavored to fortify the hedgerows with concealed mines, strategically position anti-tank guns at angles to ambush breaching tanks, and even construct deceptive fake hedgerows rigged with pre-placed anti-tank weapons. Yet none of these countermeasures proved consistently effective. The fundamental issue remained. The CQIN cutter allowed tanks to penetrate the hedgerows while keeping their formidable frontal armor facing the enemy. As long as Allied tank crews employed proper tactics, the Germans struggled to counter this novel capability effectively. By August 1944, as Allied forces broke free from Normandy and raced across France, the hedge cutters had become an indispensable asset. As the war progressed, the Sherman tanks rolling off the assembly lines in America were equipped with pre-installed hedge cutter attachments. This field modification had become an integral part of the tank's design. Culin's innovation had fundamentally transformed tank manufacturing. As Allied forces advanced beyond Normandy into the open countryside of inland France, the hedge cutters saw less use for their original purpose. However, tank crews soon realized that the steel prongs had unexpected applications. In urban combat, the cutters proved invaluable for breaching brick walls and wooden barricades, allowing tanks to dislodge German snipers entrenched within buildings. The deafening roar of a 30-ton tank smashing through a wall was enough to compel numerous German soldiers to lay down their arms rather than engage in combat. During river crossings, crews discovered that the use of cutters provided additional traction when tanks had to ascend the muddy riverbanks. The prongs dug into the slippery soil, preventing the tanks from sliding backward at critical moments. In winter warfare, the cutters acted as massive snowplows, clearing paths through the drifts that would have otherwise bogged down the vehicles, allowing the following troops and equipment to advance. Culin, now a seasoned master sergeant attached to an engineering evaluation team, traveled to various units to study these innovative applications, meticulously documenting his observations. Reflecting on his unexpected role, the inventor mused, "I never envisioned my humble hedge trimmers being employed in such diverse ways." Soldiers, ever resourceful, adapted the tool to suit their needs on the battlefield. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, German forces had erected formidable roadblocks using fallen trees to impede Allied counterattacks. However, tank crews discovered that the hedge cutters could effectively clear these obstacles, enabling armored columns to sustain their momentum even when roads were obstructed. The Sherman tank crew's resourcefulness in the field was truly remarkable. One after-action report recounted how they employed their cooling system's cutting tool to physically dislodge a disabled German tank from a narrow road, allowing an entire American column to advance unimpeded. The report described the prongs of the cutter hooking under the enemy vehicle's skirt armor, and with some concerted effort, the Sherman was able to shove the obstruction aside. This unconventional use of the hedgerow cutter prevented a potentially lengthy delay that could have jeopardized the tactical objectives. Culin, the tool's inventor, found this anecdote particularly amusing, remarking that he had crafted a device to clear brush, and now it was being used to move disabled panzers. War, it seemed, had a way of inspiring creative problem-solving. However, not all the improvisations during this conflict were met with the same level of success. The reports were encouraging, though not without their challenges. Certain tanks encountered mechanical issues when the cutting attachments were employed beyond their intended 32-13 parameters. Prongs would snap off as the tanks attempted to breach reinforced concrete 32-18 barriers. Welding failures occurred when crews tried to utilize the cutters to lift heavy objects. 32-23 There were even instances of fratricide incidents when other units, unable to recognize the modified tanks in poor 32-30 visibility, mistook the prong silhouette for enemy equipment. Culin collaborated closely with Army engineers to enhance 32-37 the training materials. He emphasized in 32-42 the training sessions that the cutter was a tool, not a panacea, and had distinct limitations. Improper usage could result in equipment damage or loss of life, while proper application could 32-50 save lives and accomplish the mission. By the dawn of 1945, as Allied troops advanced deep into Germany, the hedgerow cutter had become such a ubiquitous fixture that new tank crews could scarcely recall a time when Shermans lacked them. The innovation had become so ingrained, seamlessly integrated into doctrine and tactics. For Culin, this was both gratifying and tinged with melancholy. His invention had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. Yet, this very success meant that its pioneering origins had faded from collective memory. The hedgerow cutters were now simply a taken-for-granted part of the tank, unremarkable. As Captain Morrison remarked to Culin, "You didn't just solve a problem, CQN. You made the problem vanish so completely that people can't imagine it ever being any different." The hedgerow cutter's triumph was so resounding that its very existence faded from collective memory. Yet, the tale of its success was not without its shadows. Culin confronted unforeseen costs and repercussions. One such toll was human. As tanks gained the ability to swiftly breach hedgerows, infantry commanders grew more emboldened, launching attacks that might have been postponed or abandoned in the pre-cutter era. This newfound confidence led some units into perilous situations, sustaining casualties that prudence could have averted. Culin grappled with this burden, questioning whether his creation had emboldened commanders to become overly confident. He voiced these concerns aloud to the chaplain. Thomas O'Brien paused, contemplating the complexities. "You crafted a 34-33 device that saved lives," he responded softly. "Yet, the tactical choices commanders made in utilizing it, that's their responsibility, not yours. 34-44 You can only strive to create things that do more good than harm. You cannot control how people employ what you provide." 34-51 The German defenders also factored into the equation. The hedgerow cutters had undoubtedly accelerated the Normandy 34-58 campaign, preserving Allied lives. But this also meant the German soldiers who 35-04 might have survived a more cautious Allied advance were instead killed in the swifter push enabled by 35-11 the cutters. Culin grasped this intellectually. The objective was clear: vanquish the adversary. Yet, the emotional toll was arduous to grapple with. "I eliminated individuals I never saw," he confided to Kowalski one night. Not directly, but my creation positioned tanks to kill more effectively. I'm being decorated for that. Medals for enhancing the efficiency of killing. Somehow, it feels wrong. Kowalski paused momentarily. You know what feels wrong to me? Witnessing valiant men perish in tanks because we couldn't breach the hedge without exposing ourselves. You prevented that. Yes, your invention killed Germans. It's a weapon modification. That's its purpose. But it also saved Americans. More significantly, the ongoing conflict had been a devastating ordeal, claiming the lives of countless individuals from diverse backgrounds, Americans, Germans, and even French civilians caught in the crossfire. Your groundbreaking invention, however, had played a pivotal role in accelerating the war's conclusion, ultimately saving lives on all sides, even if the moral complexities of war remained ever present. While Culin yearned to believe that his creation had made a tangible difference, the practical realities of the situation were far from straightforward. The rapid Allied advance, facilitated by the hedgerow cutters, had outpaced the logistical capabilities of the supply chain. Fuel, ammunition, and spare parts had to be urgently dispatched to units that had surged far beyond the anticipated positions, leading to shortages in certain areas. The sergeant's groundbreaking innovation had unexpectedly disrupted the Army's logistical operations. Culin found himself in lengthy discussions with supply officers, explaining that his successful invention had created unforeseen challenges they now needed to address. I've given you a tool that enhances tank capabilities, he would argue, so you must figure out how to keep those tanks adequately provisioned as they advance at an accelerated pace. It was an unusual scenario, with an enlisted man providing strategic counsel to commissioned officers. Yet Culin's singular vantage point as the inventor compelled them to heed his advice. The military subsequently adapted, devising new logistical protocols and supply mechanisms to accommodate the heightened operational tempo enabled by the hedgerow cutters. The young mechanic, Culin, found himself unexpectedly thrust into the limelight within the Army ranks. His ingenious solution to a seemingly insurmountable problem had earned him a reputation as a technical prodigy. Soldiers eagerly sought his autograph, while officers clamored for his presence at strategy sessions. War correspondents were keen to interview the unassuming figure. Yet, Culin was deeply uncomfortable with the adulation, confiding to Morrison that he was merely a guy who had an idea, not a true hero like those risking their lives on the battlefield. Morrison empathized, acknowledging Culin's modesty as an admirable quality. However, he emphasized that Culin's contribution, though seemingly modest, had a profound impact, enabling the soldiers charging into harm's way to have a better chance of survival. The war-torn landscape bore witness to the diverse forms of heroism that defined the conflict. While some found their valor in the heat of battle, others wielded the power of their intellect to shape the course of events. Sergeant Culin, a humble mechanic from New Jersey, had emerged as an unlikely hero, his ingenuity carving a path through the dense foliage that had once impeded the Allies' advance. Reluctantly, he accepted the recognition, never quite comfortable with the mantle of heroism thrust upon him. On May 8, 1945, the guns fell silent as Germany surrendered, marking the end of the war in Europe. Culin and his unit stood amidst the jubilant celebrations in a small German town, their faces etched with a tapestry of emotions, joy, relief, and the weight of their collective sacrifices. The hedge cutters, once an unsung element of the war effort, had played a pivotal role in the ultimate victory. The Normandy campaign was significantly accelerated by the Culin hedger cutter, shaving off weeks, if not months, from the timeline. This had a cascading effect, enabling a faster advance across France, the quicker liberation of Paris, an earlier crossing of the Rhine, and a sooner arrival in Berlin. Each day saved translated to lives preserved, resources conserved, and suffering reduced. Official citations credited the Culin hedger cutter as materially contributing to the successful conclusion of the Normandy campaign and subsequent operations. In the European theater, General Eisenhower himself deemed it one of the war's most significant tactical innovations. Culin was awarded the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star, and a commendation from the Supreme Allied Commander, and was promoted to warrant officer. His name was featured in newspapers back home. Ken Cullin's creation had become a symbol of American resourcefulness, the average soldier who had applied practical thinking and scrap materials to address a challenge that had eluded specialists. Yet, as he observed the festivities in that German town, Culin felt a sense of emptiness. The problem he had solved no longer held significance. The war had ended, and the Normandy hedgerows were now a distant memory. His groundbreaking invention had become merely a footnote in the history of a conflict that had claimed millions of lives. "You're overthinking things again," Kowalski remarked, appearing beside him with 2 bottles of liberated German beer. "Just reflecting," Culin responded, accepting one of the bottles. A year ago, he had. Kowalski was affixing prongs to a tank, optimistic that his innovative concept would prove effective. "Now that the conflict has concluded, I'm endeavoring to comprehend the significance of it all," Kowalski remarked plainly. "You undoubtedly saved numerous lives," he affirmed. Kowalski had previously served as an infantryman before being reassigned to Kin's welding crew. "Had I remained an infantryman, and if tanks had been unable to breach the hedgerows, I likely would have perished, as would hundreds of my comrades. Your invention was indispensable, SGE. Never underestimate its importance." They sat in contemplative silence, observing the sunset over the devastated German landscape. Kin contemplated the series of decisions that had culminated in this moment. If he had dismissed his initial concept as too simplistic, or if Morrison had. The rules of warfare were in flux during that tumultuous period. Culin mused on the German tankers' predicament, trapped behind hedgerows they believed impenetrable, only to witness American armor bursting through. Kowalski concurred, noting the Germans deserved their defeat for instigating the conflict. Yet, Culin couldn't help but ponder the disorientation of having the very foundations of combat shift so abruptly. Both sides were engaged in a constant cycle of innovation, each vying to gain the upper hand. A single misstep, a failed test, or a combat trial gone awry could have altered the course of the war. The fragility of those pivotal moments was not lost on the team. The relentless pursuit of military advantage had driven countless innovations throughout history. From radar to proximity fuses, each new development rendered existing defenses obsolete, exposing the fragility of carefully laid plans. This was the very nature of warfare, a constant struggle to outmaneuver and outthink the enemy. Yet, in this endless cycle of one-upmanship, there lay a deeper truth: the power of human ingenuity to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. CQ pondered the fate of the now redundant hedger cutters, their distinctive prongs welded onto countless tanks. As the rules of engagement shifted, these once vital tools would be rendered obsolete, their purpose made irrelevant by the march of progress. But in their very obsolescence lay a testament to the unstoppable force of human innovation. A relentless drive to gain the upper hand, to change the game, and to rewrite the very nature of conflict. The war had taken him far from home, but now Curtis Culin found himself back in New Jersey, his decorations and recollections in tow. Ready to move on from the conflict, he returned to his former occupation, expertly repairing automobiles in a modest garage. The very talents that had made him an ingenious wartime contributor continued to serve him well in the post-war era. Skilled with machinery, adept at problem-solving, and perceptive in identifying solutions that eluded others, Culin nonetheless seldom spoke of the hedgerow cutter. When customers or acquaintances inquired about his wartime experiences, he would politely deflect, preferring to leave that chapter firmly in the past. This individual's wartime experiences were a subject he often avoided discussing. He would simply state, "I was a mechanic, fixed tanks, nothing exciting." Curiously, he neglected to mention the accolades and groundbreaking contributions that had significantly impacted the Normandy campaign. His wife, Margaret, once inquired about his reluctance to address these accomplishments, remarking, "You're a genuine hero, you should be proud." In response, he quietly acknowledged, "I'm proud of what I did, but I'm not proud of what it was for. I made a tool that helped kill people. It saved American lives, which matters, but it was still about killing. I'd rather focus on fixing things now, not on how I helped break things then." Over the decades, military scholars gradually acknowledged the pivotal role of the Culin hedgerow cutter. It was featured in publications about the Normandy offensive, documentaries exploring WWII technological advancements, and military training materials, showcasing it as an exemplar of field expedient engineering. Yet, the inventor himself, Ken, remained largely obscure beyond military history circles. In 1984, 4 decades after the D-Day landings, a young historian named David Carter sought out the now 73-year-old and long-retired Culin. Carter was authoring a book on tactical innovations in WWII and sought to interview the creator of the hedgerow cutter. "Mr. Culin, do you realize the significance of your invention?" Carter inquired during their discussion. Military analysts estimate that the cutter's deployment, the Normandy offensive, proved a pivotal turning point, sparing countless lives and revolutionizing tank warfare doctrine. This remarkable feat was orchestrated by a sergeant with no formal engineering training, who devised the solution in a mere 48 hours. Cullin's reflective pause gave way to insightful words, which Carter would later immortalize as the quintessence of American innovation. "I wasn't anything extraordinary," the sergeant mused. "Just a guy who understood machines and saw an issue that needed fixing. The true marvel was the Army giving me that opportunity. How many other brilliant ideas got overlooked because they came from the wrong person? How many problems remained unresolved simply because someone said, 'That's not how we do things'?" The path to success is often paved with serendipity and perseverance. While my unconventional concept was fortunately given a chance, I'm certain countless others with equally promising notions were overlooked. What truly set my idea apart was not my own brilliance, but the willingness of those in positions of authority to evaluate it objectively, rather than dismissing it out of hand. Captain Morrison and the test crew could have easily rejected my proposal, and division might have abandoned it after the initial combat trial. Yet they chose to focus on the merits of the idea itself, not the individual proposing it. This openness to innovation, regardless of its source, is the real lesson to be learned. Tragically, Curtis Culin did not live to see the fruits of this open-minded approach. 1963. The local newspaper's obituary for him described a mechanic, a 46-year-old war veteran, and a reserved individual who favored repairing over discussing. It 46 to 48 omitted the hedgerow cutter. Most community members remained unaware that the elderly 46 to 53 repairman had altered the course of World War II. Yet, military museums across America and 47.00 Europe preserve examples of the Culin hedgerow cutter. Chunks of steel 47.05 welded to the front of Sherman tanks. Rudimentary in appearance, yet groundbreaking in their efficacy. 47 to 12 plaques elucidate their purpose and impact. And sometimes they acknowledge 47 to 18 Curtis Culin, the eccentric mechanic who declined too. The challenges faced were daunting, with a seemingly insurmountable 47-minute, 23-second timeframe to overcome. Despite the apparent hopelessness of the situation, the team remained resolute in their determination to find a solution.